Cruella, released in 2021, is an American film produced by Walt Disney Pictures that reimagines the origins of one of Disney's most iconic villains, Cruella de Vil, a character first introduced in Dodie Smith's 1956 novel The 101 Dalmatians and later made famous through Disney's 1961 animated classic 101 Dalmatians. This particular film was directed by Craig Gillespie, known previously for directing I, Tonya, and it was written by Dana Fox and Tony McNamara, based on a story developed by Aline Brosh McKenna, Kelly Marcel, and Steve Zissis. Cruella stands as the third live-action film connected to the 101 Dalmatians franchise, but unlike its predecessors, it takes a completely fresh approach by functioning as an origin story rather than a retelling of the dog-napping tale audiences are familiar with. The film was produced by Andrew Gunn, Mark Platt, and Kristen Burr, and it was distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. It carries a runtime of approximately 2 hours and 14 minutes and was made on a budget of around $100 million, eventually going on to earn more than $230 million at the worldwide box office. The film premiered in Los Angeles on May 18, 2021, marking one of the first major red carpet events since the pandemic had brought the entertainment industry to a standstill, and it was released theatrically across the United States on May 28, 2021, with a simultaneous release on Disney Plus through the Premier Access option for those who preferred to watch from home. The story of Cruella is set in London during the 1970s, a period defined by the rise of the punk rock movement, and this cultural backdrop plays a massive role in shaping the tone, the fashion, and the rebellious energy of the entire film. At the center of the story is a young woman named Estella, a clever, imaginative, and endlessly creative girl who possesses a natural gift for fashion design but struggles to find her place in a world that constantly pushes her aside. From a young age, Estella is shown to have two very distinct sides to her personality. One side is polite, disciplined, and eager to please, while the other is wild, mischievous, and fiercely independent, a side she nicknames Cruella. This duality becomes the emotional and thematic backbone of the entire narrative, as the film slowly explores how these two identities pull at each other throughout her life. After a tragic event early in the story that leaves Estella orphaned, she finds herself alone on the streets of London, where she eventually crosses paths with two young thieves named Jasper and Horace. The trio quickly forms a found family, relying on small-time schemes and street survival to get by. As the years pass, Estella grows into a talented but overlooked young woman who dreams of becoming a legitimate fashion designer. Her big break comes when she lands a job working under the Baroness von Hellman, a ruthless, cold, and incredibly influential figure in the London fashion scene who is widely regarded as one of the most talented designers in the world. At first, Estella is dazzled by the opportunity to work alongside someone she has admired for years, but she gradually begins to uncover unsettling truths about the Baroness, including secrets that connect directly to Estella's own past and the tragedy that shaped her childhood. As Estella's understanding of the Baroness deepens, so does her transformation into Cruella. What begins as a personal desire to prove her talent evolves into a calculated and increasingly theatrical campaign of revenge against the woman who wronged her. Estella starts to embrace boldness, spectacle, and audacity, staging public fashion statements designed specifically to outshine and humiliate the Baroness in front of London's elite. This is where the film truly comes alive, blending high fashion with punk rebellion, as Cruella begins crafting elaborate looks, orchestrating dramatic public appearances, and slowly building her own reputation as a fearless and unpredictable new force in the fashion world. Throughout this journey, Jasper and Horace remain by her side, though they grow increasingly concerned about how deeply she is losing herself in the persona of Cruella, worried that the line between vengeance and identity is starting to disappear entirely. The rivalry between Cruella and the Baroness escalates dramatically as the story progresses, filled with public confrontations, clever sabotage, and a battle of wits that plays out through fashion shows, galas, and staged spectacles across the city. Along the way, secrets about Estella's mother and the true nature of her past are gradually revealed, adding emotional weight to what could have otherwise been a purely stylish revenge story. The film ultimately builds toward a climactic confrontation between Cruella and the Baroness, one that forces Estella to fully decide who she truly is and what she is willing to become in order to survive and thrive in a world that never gave her a fair chance. By the end of the film, audiences are left with a clear sense of how the seeds of the character audiences know from the animated classic were planted, setting the stage for the version of Cruella de Vil who would later become obsessed with Dalmatian fur coats. The cast of Cruella is one of its strongest assets, anchored by a powerhouse lead performance from Emma Stone, who plays both Estella and her alter ego Cruella. Stone brings a magnetic blend of vulnerability and theatrical flair to the role, capturing both the wounded orphan and the fearless provocateur within the same character. Opposite her is Emma Thompson, who plays the Baroness von Hellman with a chilling elegance, delivering one of the film's most memorable and delightfully villainous performances. Thompson's portrayal balances icy menace with sharp wit, making the Baroness a formidable and endlessly watchable antagonist. Joel Fry plays Jasper, one of Estella's closest companions and a steady, warm-hearted presence throughout the story, while Paul Walter Hauser plays Horace, the group's other loyal friend, bringing comedic timing and heart to the trio's dynamic. Emily Beecham appears as Catherine, a character closely tied to Estella's early life and backstory, and Kirby Howell-Baptiste plays Anita Darling, a journalist who becomes intertwined with Estella's rise in the fashion world. Mark Strong rounds out the principal cast as John, the Baroness's enigmatic and loyal servant, whose presence carries an air of mystery throughout much of the film. Supporting roles are filled out by performers such as Kay Van Novak and Jamie Demetriou, both of whom add flavor and personality to the film's colorful supporting cast of London eccentrics. Beyond the performances, Cruella distinguishes itself through its exceptional technical craftsmanship. The film's cinematography, handled by Nicholas Karakatsanis, captures the gritty yet glamorous atmosphere of 1970s London with striking visual style, while the editing by Tatiana S. Regal keeps the film's energetic pacing sharp and engaging. The musical score was composed by Nicholas Britell, whose work blends orchestral elements with the raw energy of the punk era, and the film's soundtrack is stacked with an impressive lineup of classic rock and punk songs from artists spanning several decades, giving the movie an unmistakable sonic identity. An original song titled Call Me Cruella, performed by Florence and the Machine, plays during the end credits and has become one of the most talked about musical elements associated with the film. However, it is the costume design, crafted by the legendary Jenny Bevan, that truly stands as one of the film's crowning achievements. Every outfit worn by Cruella throughout the film feels like a statement piece, blending haute couture with punk rebellion in a way that visually communicates the character's evolving identity. And this costume work ultimately earned the film significant industry recognition and awards attention. In terms of release information, Cruella was originally intended to hit theaters in December of 2020, but due to the widespread disruptions caused by the pandemic, Disney pushed the release date multiple times before ultimately settling on the Memorial Day weekend release of May 28, 2021. The decision to release the film simultaneously in theaters and on Disney Plus through the Premier Access model reflected the unusual hybrid distribution strategies studios were experimenting with at the time, allowing audiences to choose between a traditional theatrical experience or a premium at-home viewing option for an additional fee. The film's marketing campaign leaned heavily into its punk aesthetic, with trailers showcasing dramatic needle drops, striking fashion moments, and the intense rivalry between Cruella and the Baroness, all designed to highlight the stylish, rebellious energy that set this film apart from typical family-friendly Disney fare. The trailers generated significant buzz specifically because they positioned Cruella not as a children's movie in the traditional sense, but as a stylish, edgy character study aimed at a broader, more mature audience, which is reflected in the film's PG-13 rating, a rarity for a Disney live-action release tied to an animated classic. What makes Cruella particularly fascinating as a piece of filmmaking is how boldly it reframes a character who has historically been portrayed as purely villainous. Rather than simply painting Cruella de Vil as evil for the sake of being evil, this film takes the time to build a layered, sympathetic origin story that explains her motivations, her trauma, and her transformation into the fierce, unapologetic figure audiences eventually recognize. The film explores heavy themes such as identity, class struggle, betrayal, and the cost of ambition, all wrapped inside a visually dazzling package filled with elaborate fashion, dramatic confrontations, and a killer soundtrack. It challenges the audience to reconsider what defines a villain, suggesting that the line between hero and antagonist is often shaped by circumstance, pain, and the way the world chooses to treat those who refuse to conform. The dynamic between Cruella and the Baroness also works brilliantly as a mirror, showing two powerful, talented women shaped by similar ambitions but separated by the choices they make and the values they hold on to, or abandon, along the way. The success of Cruella, both critically and commercially, ultimately led Disney to move forward with plans for a sequel, further expanding this bold reimagining of the character's world. The film's blend of style, substance, and unforgettable performances helped it stand out as one of the more daring entries in Disney's growing catalog of live-action reinterpretations, proving that even the most well-known villains can be given fresh, compelling new dimensions when handled with creativity and confidence. Cruella opens by introducing audiences to a young girl named Estella, born with a highly unusual and striking appearance, half of her hair stark black and the other half snow white, a physical trait that immediately marks her as different from every other child around her. From her earliest years, Estella displays a personality defined by two opposing forces living inside her. One side of her is calm, obedient, and eager to be accepted by the world around her, while the other side is wild, defiant, and impossible to control, a side so distinct that her mother eventually gives it its own name, calling it Cruella whenever that fierce, rebellious energy takes over. Estella's mother, Catherine, does everything she can to help her daughter suppress this wilder half, dyeing her hair to hide the black and white pattern and constantly urging her to keep her head down, blend in, and avoid drawing attention to herself. Despite these efforts, Estella struggles deeply at school, unable to hold back her sharp tongue or her instinct to fight back against classmates who mock and bully her, and this pattern of conflict eventually escalates to the point where she is expelled entirely, leaving Catherine with few options and mounting concern about her daughter's future. Desperate for a fresh start, Catherine decides to take young Estella to London, hoping that a change of environment might help her daughter find better opportunities and perhaps even a proper education. Before making this journey, Catherine reveals that she intends to visit an old friend, a wealthy and influential woman she once worked for, in hopes of securing financial help or guidance for Estella's future. That night, the pair arrives at a lavish estate where a grand gala is taking place, filled with elegant guests, glittering decorations, and an atmosphere of extravagant wealth entirely unfamiliar to Estella. While Catherine attempts to find a private moment to speak with her old acquaintance, young Estella wanders off, drawn by curiosity toward the party itself, and ends up causing a small disturbance when she sneaks into the estate and interacts with a group of elegant Dalmatians that belong to the host of the event. Startled and provoked, the dogs begin chasing Estella through the mansion and eventually out onto the grounds, leading to a frantic and increasingly dangerous pursuit along the edge of a cliffside terrace overlooking the sea. Catherine, spotting the chaos, rushes to intervene and place herself between her daughter and the dogs, but in the confusion of the moment, she loses her footing and falls from the cliff to her death below. Estella, horrified and consumed by guilt, believes that her own recklessness directly caused her mother's death, a belief that will haunt her for years and quietly shape the person she eventually becomes. Left completely alone and orphaned in an unfamiliar city, Estella flees the estate that very night, clutching a treasured necklace that once belonged to her mother, a piece of jewelry Catherine had always insisted must never be worn and must be protected above all else. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, Estella makes her way into the heart of London, where she soon crosses paths with two young boys living on the streets, Jasper and the slightly younger, more mischievous Horace, along with their small dog. The two boys, themselves skilled in the art of petty theft and street survival, take pity on the grieving, directionless girl and eventually welcome her into their makeshift found family. Together, the three of them build a life within the hidden corners of London, turning an abandoned space into a home base and relying on clever scams, pickpocketing, and small cons to get by day to day. As the years pass, this unlikely trio grows incredibly close, with Jasper and Horace treating Estella not just as a partner in crime but as a true sister, someone they would protect without hesitation. By the time Estella reaches her 20s, she has become an integral part of their small criminal operation, helping orchestrate increasingly elaborate schemes that blend disguise, misdirection, and quick thinking. Yet despite her skill as a con artist, Estella has never let go of her true passion, a deep and genuine love for fashion design, something she continues to explore quietly through sketches and homemade creations even as she lives a life defined by survival rather than creativity. Jasper, aware of how much this dream means to her, eventually manages to help her secure a legitimate job as a cleaner at Liberty, one of London's most prestigious department stores, hoping this might finally give Estella a path toward the future she has always wanted. Estella throws herself into the job with genuine enthusiasm, but the monotony and lack of recognition begin to wear on her, and one drunken night after a difficult shift, she impulsively decides to completely redesign one of the store's display windows, transforming it into a bold, imaginative showcase using mannequins and materials she was never authorized to touch. Predictably, this act costs her the job entirely, and she is fired on the spot the following morning. However, the very window display that got her fired happens to catch the attention of someone far more powerful than any store manager, the Baroness von Hellman, one of the most celebrated and feared designers in the entire fashion world, who recognizes raw, undeniable talent when she sees it and personally intervenes to offer Estella a position within her prestigious fashion house. Overjoyed and completely starstruck, Estella accepts the opportunity without hesitation, eager to finally step into the world she has dreamed about her entire life. At first, working under the Baroness feels like everything Estella ever wanted, and she quickly proves herself to be an exceptionally gifted designer, impressing her intimidating new boss with fresh ideas and technical skill far beyond what is expected of someone in her position. The Baroness, though undeniably brilliant, reveals herself early on to be a cold, self-absorbed, and often cruel employer, someone who values talent purely for what it can do for her own legacy, and who shows little regard for the well-being of those who work for her. Despite this harsh environment, Estella continues to rise within the fashion house, slowly gaining the Baroness's trust and even earning small moments of genuine approval, something Estella desperately craves given how starved she has always been for recognition and stability. The turning point in the story arrives during a lavish gala hosted by the Baroness, an event where Estella, in a moment of nostalgic sentimentality, decides to wear her late mother's necklace for the very first time since the night of Catherine's death. The moment the Baroness spots the necklace, her demeanor shifts dramatically, and she immediately and forcefully claims that the piece of jewelry actually belongs to her, insisting it was stolen from her years earlier. Confused and shaken, Estella is forced to hand over the necklace, and shortly afterward, she narrowly escapes a terrifying encounter when the Baroness's own Dalmatians, the very same breed of dog involved in her mother's death years earlier, chase her through the estate grounds in a scene that mirrors the tragedy from her childhood. This unsettling parallel plants a seed of suspicion in Estella's mind, and as she begins piecing together fragments of memory and half-forgotten details from that fateful night, she starts to seriously suspect that the Baroness may have been present at the very same gala where her mother died all those years ago, raising the horrifying possibility that the woman she now works for might be directly connected to her mother's death. Fueled by this growing suspicion and a deep desire for justice, Estella confides in Jasper and Horace, and together the trio begins formulating a plan to uncover the truth while simultaneously extracting a measure of revenge against the Baroness for the pain she has caused. It is at this point that Estella fully embraces the wilder, more theatrical side of her personality, deliberately reviving the persona her mother once tried to suppress. She begins operating under the name Cruella, crafting an entirely new public identity built around shocking fashion statements, dramatic entrances, and audacious acts of public rebellion, all specifically designed to torment, embarrass, and ultimately destroy the Baroness's carefully cultivated reputation within London's high society fashion scene. Cruella's first major public appearance comes in the form of a stunning, unauthorized entrance at one of the Baroness's own high-profile events, where Estella arrives in a breathtaking gown that instantly steals the spotlight and sends shockwaves through the crowd, marking the beginning of a very public and increasingly personal rivalry between the two women. From this point forward, the film escalates into a thrilling back-and-forth battle of wits, style, and sabotage between Cruella and the Baroness. Cruella orchestrates one spectacular scheme after another, including releasing a swarm of live moths during one of the Baroness's runway shows to disrupt the event and steal attention for her own emerging brand, and later crashing an exclusive black and white themed gala in a stunning, vivid red gown that completely upends the Baroness's carefully controlled aesthetic vision for the night. Each confrontation is staged as a public spectacle, blending high fashion with punk rock energy, and every scheme is designed not just to embarrass the Baroness but to slowly chip away at her power and control over the fashion world she has dominated for so long. Throughout these escalating conflicts, Estella receives crucial help from an eccentric and flamboyant vintage clothing shop owner named Artie, who quickly becomes an enthusiastic ally, providing costumes, resources, and creative support for Cruella's increasingly elaborate public appearances. As Cruella's fame and notoriety grow, so does the Baroness's fury and determination to uncover the true identity of the mysterious figure who has been humiliating her at every turn. She launches an aggressive campaign to track down Cruella, offering rewards for information and using every resource at her disposal to identify the person responsible for these public spectacles, unaware that the very woman she is hunting is someone who works directly under her own roof. Tensions escalate further when the Baroness's loyal and long-serving butler, a quiet, watchful man named John, begins showing signs of sympathy toward Estella, subtly assisting her in small ways while clearly wrestling with divided loyalties between his employer and the young woman he has grown fond of. Eventually, John reveals a piece of information that completely reshapes the entire story, disclosing to Estella that the Baroness once had a daughter of her own many years earlier, a child she viewed as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing in the way of her ambitions and public image. According to John, the Baroness coldly ordered that the infant be taken away and disposed of, but John, unable to go through with such a horrific act, secretly gave the baby to a kind young nanny in the Baroness's employ instead, allowing the child to live and grow up far away from the Baroness's influence. This revelation sends Estella into a spiral of shock and disbelief as she begins to realize the devastating implication behind John's story, slowly connecting the pieces to understand that she herself may be the very child the Baroness once tried to have eliminated, and that the woman she always believed to be her birth mother, Catherine, was in fact the nanny who saved her life and raised her as her own out of pure love and sacrifice. The necklace that has played such a significant role throughout the story is revealed to hold even greater significance than previously understood, tied directly to proof of Estella's true parentage and her rightful, though deeply unwanted, connection to the Baroness. As Estella grapples with this staggering truth, she must reconcile the horrifying reality that the woman she has been secretly working against, the woman responsible in some way for her mother's death and possibly her own attempted murder as an infant, is actually her biological mother. When the Baroness eventually discovers the truth herself, that the notorious Cruella tormenting her public image is none other than her own biological daughter, Alive despite her earlier orders, she reacts not with warmth or remorse but with cold, calculated determination to eliminate the threat entirely in order to protect her legacy, her reputation, and her carefully constructed empire. This sets the stage for the film's dramatic climax, as the Baroness lures Estella into a trap during another lavish public event, luring her toward the same cliffside terrace that once claimed Catherine's life years earlier, fully intending to push Estella to her death and erase the last living reminder of the daughter she never wanted. However, having grown suspicious of the Baroness's intentions and anticipating the danger she now faces, Estella, together with Jasper, Horace, and Artie, orchestrates an elaborate deception of her own, staging a fake death using a mannequin dress to look exactly like her, which is thrown from the cliff in her place while the real Estella escapes unharmed and unseen. Believing she has successfully eliminated her daughter and permanently silenced the threat posed by Cruella, the Baroness's triumph is short-lived, as evidence carefully planted and orchestrated by Estella and her allies begins pointing law enforcement directly toward the Baroness, implicating her not only in the apparent murder of Cruella but also in the long-buried truth surrounding Catherine's death years earlier. The Baroness is ultimately arrested and taken into custody, her once untouchable empire crumbling around her as her crimes finally catch up to her. With the Baroness removed from power and her legal status as the woman's biological daughter now established, Estella steps forward to claim what is rightfully hers, inheriting the Baroness's fashion house, her wealth, and her legacy, transforming the very empire built on cruelty and control into something entirely her own. Rather than abandoning the Cruella persona now that her mission for revenge has been completed, Estella chooses to fully embrace both sides of her identity moving forward, blending the sharp business mind and creative brilliance of Estella with the fearless, unapologetic boldness of Cruella, running her new fashion house alongside Jasper and Horace, who remain by her side as trusted partners rather than simple accomplices. In the film's closing moments, audiences are given a glimpse of the future that ties this origin story directly into the broader mythology fans already know, as Cruella is shown sending a gift, a small Dalmatian puppy, to a couple named Anita and Roger, subtle nods to characters who will become central figures in the original tale of 101 Dalmatians. This closing gesture plants the seeds for the deeper, more twisted relationship Cruella will eventually develop with Dalmatians in the years to come, hinting at the darker path still ahead for the character even as this particular chapter of her story reaches its triumphant conclusion. In a final, quietly chilling coda, Cruella pays a visit to the imprisoned Baroness, engaging in a brief but pointed exchange that reinforces just how completely the balance of power between them has shifted, leaving audiences with a lasting impression of a woman who has fully stepped into her power, unapologetic, fearless, and finally free to become exactly who she was always meant to be. Emma Stone, who takes on the dual role of Estella and Cruella in this film, was born Emily Jean Stone on November 6, 1988, in Scottsdale, Arizona, to Krista Jean Stone, a homemaker, and Jeffrey Charles Stone, a contracting company founder. She grew up alongside her younger brother Spencer in a supportive, middle-class household that encouraged her creative instincts from a very young age. As a child, Stone struggled significantly with anxiety and panic attacks, which made it difficult for her to socialize comfortably with her peers, and it was ultimately through performing arts that she found a genuine outlet for that anxiety. At the age of 11, she made her very first stage appearance with the Valley Youth Theater in Phoenix, performing in a production of The Wind in the Willows, and over the following years she appeared in 16 different productions with that same regional theater company. By the time she was 15, Stone had become completely certain that acting was the path she wanted to pursue professionally, and in a moment that has since become part of Hollywood legend, she put together a PowerPoint presentation for her parents titled Project Hollywood, set to a Madonna song, in order to convince them to let her move to Los Angeles and pursue acting full-time. Her parents agreed, and in January of 2004, Stone relocated to Los Angeles with her mother, leaving behind her education at Xavier College Preparatory after only one semester. Her earliest professional break came through the VH1 reality competition series In Search of the New Partridge Family, which she won, though the resulting show did not achieve lasting success. She went on to build a television resume through small roles in various series before landing her first significant film role in the 2007 comedy Superbad, a breakout moment that opened the door to a string of increasingly prominent projects, including Zombieland and the teen comedy Easy A, the latter of which cemented her as a rising star capable of carrying a film on her own. Her visibility skyrocketed further when she was cast as Gwen Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man and its sequel, introducing her to a massive global audience. However, it was her collaboration with director Damien Chazelle on the 2016 musical La La Land, opposite Ryan Gosling, that represented the true peak of her early career, earning her the Academy Award for Best Actress and establishing her as one of the defining performers of her generation. Stone continued to push her range through unconventional and critically acclaimed work, including her performance in the dark, surreal film Poor Things, which brought her a second Academy Award for Best Actress years later. Alongside her professional achievements, Stone experienced a long, well-documented relationship with her Amazing Spider-Man co-star Andrew Garfield, whom she dated for several years before the two amicably separated. She later married comedian and filmmaker Dave McCary in 2020, and the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter, in 2021, the same year Cruella was released. Known for guarding her personal life closely, Stone has continued to balance motherhood with an increasingly ambitious and eclectic acting career. Emma Thompson, who portrays the formidable Baroness von Hellman, was born on April 15, 1959, in Paddington, London, into a family already deeply rooted in the entertainment industry. Her father, Eric Thompson, was a well-known television and stage actor best remembered for writing and narrating the beloved children's program The Magic Roundabout, while her mother, Phyllida Law, was a respected Scottish actress who would go on to appear alongside her daughter in multiple films throughout their careers. Thompson's younger sister, Sophie Thompson, also became a professional actress, making the Thompson household a genuine dynasty of British performing talent. Despite this artistic upbringing, young Emma Thompson did not initially gravitate toward acting the way her sister did, choosing instead to study English literature at Newnham College, Cambridge. It was there that her natural wit caught the attention of friends who encouraged her to audition for the university's famous Footlights comedy troupe, a group that had previously helped launch the careers of several members of Monty Python. During her time with Footlights, Thompson worked alongside future stars such as Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie, and in 1981 the group's revue traveled to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where it won a prize and secured a London theatre run. After graduating in 1980, Thompson began building a career in television and radio comedy, eventually landing acclaimed roles in British series such as Tutti Frutti and Fortunes of War, both of which earned her BAFTA Television Awards for Best Actress. Her film career gained serious momentum in the early 1990s with a series of celebrated performances, including her Oscar-winning turn in Howard's End in 1992, followed by widely praised work in The Remains of the Day and In the Name of the Father, the latter of which earned her a rare double Oscar nomination in a single year. In 1995, Thompson achieved something no one else in Academy Award history had accomplished before, winning the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for her work adapting Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, in which she also starred, making her the only person to have won Academy Awards in both an acting and a writing category. Her career continued to flourish across a remarkable range of projects, from portraying the magical nanny in Nanny McPhee, a film she also wrote, to appearing as Professor Sybil Trelawney in the Harry Potter film series, to starring in beloved ensemble films such as Love Actually. On a personal level, Thompson was married to actor and director Kenneth Branagh from 1989 until 1995, and she later married actor Greg Wise in 2003, with whom she has a daughter named Gaia, born in 1999. Thompson was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in recognition of her extraordinary contributions to drama, and her performance as the icy, image-obsessed Baroness in Cruella allowed her to bring decades of theatrical precision and razor-sharp comic timing to one of the film's most memorable antagonists. Joe Fry, who plays the loyal and warm-hearted Jasper, was born in London, England, in the mid-1980s, with most sources placing his birth on May 20, 1985. He grew up in a household with a strong connection to the arts, as his father worked as a musician and his mother as a professional dancer, an environment that clearly shaped his own creative path. Fry pursued formal training at the prestigious Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, one of the most respected drama schools in the United Kingdom, and after graduating he began building a steady and varied career across television, film, and theater. His early screen work included appearances in British procedural dramas and sitcoms, and his first major film role came in the 2008 historical epic 10,000 BC. Fry's ability to move fluidly between comedic and dramatic material became one of the defining traits of his early career, as he built a strong reputation in British sitcoms such as White Van Man, Trolleyed, and the historical comedy Plebs, all of which showcased his sharp comic instincts. His profile expanded significantly when he was cast as his Darzo Lorak in the globally popular HBO series Game of Thrones, appearing across 2 seasons and introducing him to a massive international audience unfamiliar with his earlier British television work. Fry continued to build momentum with supporting roles in acclaimed films, including a memorable appearance in the Paul King-directed Paddington 2, which was celebrated for its warmth and craftsmanship. His casting as Jasper in Cruella marked another major milestone, placing him alongside Emma Stone and Emma Thompson in a high-profile Disney production, and the film's global success further elevated his standing within the industry. He followed this with roles in projects such as the Beatles-inspired film Yesterday, where he played a character named Rocky, and later joined the ensemble of the pirate comedy series Our Flag Means Death as the character Frenchie, a role that earned him further critical praise and a devoted fanbase. Outside of acting, Fry has maintained a lifelong passion for music, playing several instruments with a particular focus on guitar, and he was once part of a band called Animal Circus that released an extended play early in his career. His journey from British sitcom television to major international franchises reflects a career built steadily through consistent, versatile work rather than a single overnight breakthrough. Paul Walter Hauser, who brings comedic warmth to the role of Horace, was born on October 15, 1986, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and was raised in the smaller city of Saginaw, Michigan, within a family with an unusually deep religious lineage. Hauser comes from a long line of Lutheran ministers, being the son, grandson, great-grandson, and great-great-grandson of pastors, with his own father serving as a Lutheran minister as well. Despite this deeply religious upbringing, Hauser found his true calling in comedy, beginning stand-up performances at the remarkably young age of 16. He attended Valley Lutheran High School, a private parochial school in his hometown, before eventually making the move to Los Angeles to pursue acting and writing more seriously, at which point he set aside his academic pursuits entirely to chase opportunities in entertainment. His early career was defined by small guest appearances and background roles in television comedies, including brief stints on shows such as Community and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, as he steadily built connections and experience within the Los Angeles comedy scene. Hauser's breakout moment arrived when he was cast as Sean Eckhart, the eccentric and self-important bodyguard entangled in the real-life Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan scandal, in the critically acclaimed 2017 film I, Tonya. Interestingly, Hauser was in the middle of shooting a pilot in Vancouver when the audition call came through, and he later admitted he barely believed the opportunity was real given how competitive the role was expected to be. His performance in I, Tonya proved to be a turning point, drawing widespread praise and directly leading to his casting in Spike Lee's Oscar-winning film Black KK Klansman the following year, where he portrayed a memorably repugnant racist character named Ivanhoe. Hauser continued building momentum with roles in Super Troopers 2 and Spike Lee's The Five Bloods, before landing his first true leading role in the 2019 biographical drama Richard Jewell, playing the real-life security guard wrongly suspected of the Centennial Olympic Park bombing, a performance that earned him the National Board of Review's Award for Best Breakthrough Performance. His casting as Horace in Cruella came shortly after this breakthrough, further establishing him as one of Hollywood's most reliable and distinctive character actors. Hauser has continued to demonstrate remarkable range across projects such as Cobra Kai, where he plays the character Stingray, and various other film and television roles that blend his natural comedic instincts with genuine emotional depth. Known for his self-described identity as a hardworking, blue-collar actor who built his career gradually rather than through overnight fame, Hauser is married to Amy Elizabeth Boland, with whom he has 2 children, and he remains an avid fan of professional wrestling in his personal life. Emily Beecham, who plays Catherine, the woman who raises Estella as her own daughter, was born on May 12, 1984, in the Wythenshawe area of Manchester, England, to an English father who worked as an airline pilot and an American mother, giving her dual citizenship in both the United Kingdom and the United States. Her father's career meant that her childhood involved a fair amount of movement, and this somewhat nomadic upbringing eventually gave way to a serious pursuit of acting when she enrolled at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, commonly known as LAMDA, in 2003 at the age of 18. She began accepting professional roles even before finishing her training, making her earliest appearances in British television productions including the thriller Bon Voyage and the supernatural series Afterlife. Beecham spent the following years building a steady presence in British television, appearing in respected productions such as Silent Witness, The Village, and adaptations of literary works, gradually establishing herself as a dependable and versatile performer. Her profile expanded internationally when she was cast as the widow in the AMC martial arts drama series Into the Badlands, a role that ran across 3 seasons from 2015 to 2019 and required her to develop physical and combat skills alongside her dramatic performance. During this same period, she also appeared in the Coen brothers' star-studded comedy Hail, Caesar, playing a small but memorable role that placed her within one of the most acclaimed filmmaking duos in the industry. In 2017, Beecham took on the title role in the British independent film Daphne, a performance that earned her a nomination for Best Actress at the British Independent Film Awards and marked a significant step forward in her dramatic range. Her career reached a defining peak in 2019 when she starred in the science fiction drama Little Joe, directed by Jessica Hausner, delivering a performance that won her the prestigious Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival, one of the most respected honors in international cinema. Her casting in Cruella followed shortly afterward, placing her within a major Disney production alongside an accomplished ensemble cast. Beecham continued to expand her international profile with a leading role in the Netflix mystery series 1899, further showcasing her ability to anchor complex, atmospheric productions. Throughout her career, she has balanced prestige independent film work with larger studio productions, building a reputation as an actress capable of bringing emotional depth to even brief but pivotal roles, exactly the kind of quiet, grounding presence her character provides within the story of Cruella. Kirby Howell-Baptiste, who plays journalist Anita Darling, was born on either October 23 or February 7 depending on the source consulted, in 1987, in North London, England, and has since become known for her sharp comedic timing and commanding screen presence across both television and film. Raised in London and of Jamaican descent, she was introduced to acting at the age of 12 when her mother enrolled her in the Anna Schurz Theatre, now known as the Young Actors Theatre, setting her on a path that would define the rest of her life. As a teenager, she began performing on London stages, most notably working with the respected Talawa Theatre Company, before eventually making the significant decision to relocate to Los Angeles to further refine her craft at the renowned Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute. Her early career in the United States involved a steady stream of guest appearances and supporting roles across a wide variety of television series, gradually building the kind of broad industry recognition that would later define her as one of the most reliably seen stealing character actresses working in comedy and drama alike. She earned a recurring role in the ABC sitcom Downward Dog and appeared in the Showtime series House of Lies, before landing a breakout recurring role as Elena in the acclaimed BBC America thriller series Killing Eve. Around the same period, she became a fan favorite for her role as Simone Garnett, a neuroscientist and love interest, in the hit NBC comedy series The Good Place, a show celebrated for its clever writing and philosophical humor. Her range continued to expand through roles in the HBO series Barry, where she played actress Sasha Baxter, and the dark comedy series Why Women Kill, in which she portrayed Taylor Harding. Howell Baptiste's casting as Anita in Cruella allowed her to bring her natural wit and charisma to a major studio film, further establishing her as a performer capable of moving comfortably between prestige television and blockbuster cinema. In the years following Cruella, she went on to take on the striking role of Death in the acclaimed Netflix adaptation of The Sandman, a performance widely praised for its warmth and humanity, further cementing her reputation as one of the more distinctive and beloved character actors of her generation. Since 2023, she has often been credited professionally under the simple mononym Kirby, reflecting her growing stature within the industry. Mark Strong, who plays the Baroness's quiet, morally conflicted butler John, was born Marco Giuseppe Salasolia on August 5, 1963, in the Islington district of London, the son of an Austrian mother and an Italian father. His father left the family shortly after his birth, leaving his mother to raise him largely on her own while working as an au pair to support the household. In an effort to help her son better fit in with his peers growing up in London, his mother legally changed his name by deed poll while he was still young, and it was through this decision that Marco Giuseppe Salasolia became known to the world as Mark Strong. He received his secondary education at Wyndham College in Norfolk before initially pursuing an entirely different career path, studying law for a period in Munich with the intention of becoming a lawyer. However, the pull toward performance eventually proved stronger, and Strong returned to London to study English and drama at Royal Holloway College, later furthering his craft at the highly respected Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. Strong made his earliest screen appearance in an episode of the long-running British soap opera EastEnders in 1989, and from there he built a substantial and varied career in British television, including standout performances in the acclaimed miniseries Our Friends in the North and multiple installments of the Prime Suspect franchise. His work in the BBC drama serial The Long Firm earned him a BAFTA nomination, further establishing his reputation as a serious and versatile dramatic actor within the United Kingdom. Strong's transition into major international films began to accelerate in the mid-2000s, with notable roles in Oliver Twist and the fantasy adventure Stardust, in which he played Prince Septimus. His profile rose dramatically with his portrayal of the villainous Lord Henry Blackwood in Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes opposite Robert Downey Jr., a performance that helped define his growing reputation as one of British cinema's most compelling on-screen antagonists. He continued building this reputation through roles such as the ruthless crime boss Frank D'Amico in Kick-Ass and the powerful villain Sinestro in Green Lantern, while also demonstrating his dramatic range in prestige projects such as Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, in which he starred alongside longtime collaborator Colin Firth, an actor with whom he would go on to share the screen in 5 different films throughout his career. Strong further diversified his filmography with roles in Zero Dark 30, The Imitation Game, and the widely beloved Kingsman franchise, where he played Merlin, a rare heroic and paternal role that endeared him to a broad new generation of fans. His casting as John in Cruella allowed him to bring a quiet, restrained intensity to a pivotal supporting role, using subtle expression and controlled emotion to convey years of buried guilt and hidden loyalty. Known throughout the industry for his commanding presence and his ability to bring gravity to nearly any character he plays, Strong has continued to balance blockbuster franchise work with prestigious theatrical and dramatic projects throughout a career that now spans more than 3 decades. Cruella carries a long and complicated production history that stretches back nearly a decade before the film ever reached theaters. Walt Disney Pictures first announced its intention to develop a project centered on the origins of Cruella de Vil back in 2013, with producer Andrew Gunn attached from those very early stages. For several years, the project moved slowly through development, cycling through different creative visions and potential directors before finally gaining real momentum later in the decade. At one point, director Alex Timbers was confirmed to helm the film, but scheduling conflicts eventually forced him to step away from the project, opening the door for Craig Gillespie, fresh off the critical success of I, Tonya, to take over as director. This connection between Gillespie and star Paul Walter Hauser, who had also appeared in I, Tonya, would later become one of the more interesting behind-the-scenes threads tying the film's cast and crew together. The screenplay itself passed through multiple hands over the years, with contributions from writers including Aline Brosh McKenna, Kelly Marcel, Steve Zissou, and eventually Dana Fox and Tony McNamara, who received final screenplay credit. Spectre co-writer Jez Butterworth also worked on an earlier draft of the script during the mid-2010s, reflecting just how many creative voices shaped the project before it reached its final form. Emma Stone herself was cast in the lead role as early as 2016, years before cameras ever started rolling, and she would go on to serve not only as the film's star but also as an executive producer, giving her a hand in shaping the project from a business and creative standpoint as well as a performance one. When it comes to the film's actual budget, the reported figures vary depending on the source, which is fairly common for large studio productions where marketing costs, production costs, and total studio investment often get blended together in public reporting. Some outlets in the film's own production notes placed the core production budget at around $100 million, covering the costs of principal photography, cast and crew salaries, elaborate set construction, and post-production work. Other financial breakdowns and industry analyses have placed the number significantly higher, closer to $200 million when factoring in the full scope of costume work, production design, and other above-the-line expenses, which would place Cruella in a similar budget tier to other major Disney live-action reimaginings released around the same era, such as Aladdin and Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. Regardless of which figure is most precise, it's clear that Disney invested heavily in the film's visual ambition, and much of that investment is immediately visible on screen through the elaborate costuming and richly detailed sets. When marketing and distribution costs are factored in on top of the production budget, the film's total financial exposure for the studio likely climbed into the range of $300 million or more, meaning Cruella needed to perform strongly both theatrically and through Disney's streaming platform to be considered a financial success. The film ultimately grossed around $233 million worldwide at the box office, a solid result, though one that fell short of the roughly $400 million mark typically needed for a film at this budget level to be considered a clean financial win purely on theatrical numbers. However, because Cruella was released simultaneously in theaters and on Disney Plus through the Premier Access option, which required an additional one-time fee on top of a standard subscription, the studio was able to capture a meaningful additional revenue stream that helped offset the more modest theatrical performance. A strategy Disney had been experimenting with throughout the unusual pandemic-era theatrical landscape. Principal photography for Cruella began in August of 2019 and continued through the following months, with much of the filming taking place across a wide range of locations in and around London, along with several grand countryside estates used to represent the more opulent, aristocratic corners of the story's world. The production made extensive use of real London locations rather than relying entirely on soundstage work, giving the film a tactile, lived-in sense of place that grounded its more theatrical, fashion-driven sequences. Streets and buildings throughout areas such as Bloomsbury, Soho, St. James's, and Notting Hill were transformed to reflect the gritty yet stylish atmosphere of 1970s London, while the interior and exterior of the historic Liberty department store in the city's West End played a pivotal role in the story, serving as the workplace where Estella first catches the attention of the Baroness. One particularly charming detail involves the small, picturesque passageway of Pickering Place near St. James's Street, a real historical location dating back centuries, which was used for the scene in which the group's dog cleverly opens a door during one of their early heists. For the film's more extravagant estate scenes, including the fictional Hellman Hall associated with the Baroness, the production filmed at Englefield House, a genuinely stately historical property located near Reading, England, whose grand architecture provided exactly the kind of intimidating, aristocratic backdrop the story required. Additional filming took place at other impressive countryside properties, including Halton House near Aylesbury and West Wickham Park, both of which lent the production a sense of old-world grandeur that contrasted sharply with the punk-influenced chaos of Cruella's rebellious world. Remarkably, the production managed to complete principal photography just before the global disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic forced widespread shutdowns across the film industry in March of 2020, meaning Cruella largely avoided the kind of mid-shoot production halts that affected so many other films during that period, even though its release date and marketing rollout were still significantly impacted by the changing theatrical landscape in the months that followed. The visual craftsmanship behind Cruella stands as one of its most celebrated achievements, and much of that success traces back to the extraordinary work of costume designer Jenny Bevan, a veteran of the industry known for her meticulous, character-driven approach to costuming. For this film, Bevan and her team created an astonishing number of individual looks, with reports indicating that Emma Stone's character alone required around 47 distinct outfits throughout the film, while Emma Thompson's Baroness was outfitted in roughly 33 separate looks of her own. Each costume was designed not simply to look striking on camera, but to actively communicate character, status, and emotional shifts throughout the story, with Cruella's punk-infused, boundary-pushing designs standing in constant visual contrast to the more rigid, controlled elegance of the Baroness's wardrobe. This extraordinary costume work ultimately earned the film the Academy Award for Best Achievement in Costume Design, a well-deserved recognition of just how central fashion was to the storytelling itself. Alongside the costume department, production designer Fiona Crombie faced her own significant challenge in bringing the film's world to life, later revealing in interviews that the production required construction and dressing of well over 100 individual sets across the course of the shoot, ranging from small, intimate interiors to massive, elaborate ballroom and gala spaces. Crombie has spoken about how proud she and her team were of the level of detail woven into every single one of those sets, regardless of how briefly they appeared on screen, reflecting the kind of meticulous craftsmanship that went into building the film's richly textured world. On the technical side, cinematographer Nicholas Karakatsanis employed two distinct camera systems throughout the shoot in order to visually differentiate the film's dual worlds, using more mobile, handheld setups to capture the chaotic, high-energy scenes surrounding Cruella's rebellious schemes, while relying on more composed, stately camera work to capture the controlled, opulent environment surrounding the Baroness. A subtle but effective technical choice that reinforced the film's central thematic contrast between its two central characters. Beyond the technical and financial details of the production, some of the most entertaining stories to emerge from the making of Cruella come directly from the cast themselves, particularly from the wonderfully candid interviews given by Emma Stone and Emma Thompson while promoting the film. Despite playing bitter, scheming rivals on screen, the two actresses have repeatedly described their real-life relationship during filming as warm, playful, and full of genuine affection. In one widely shared interview, Stone described Thompson as someone who brought an infectious sense of fun to the set, recalling with clear delight how Thompson would casually pop into her trailer suggesting they share a round of tequila between takes, a habit that speaks volumes about the relaxed, joyful atmosphere the two women cultivated despite the demanding nature of the shoot. Thompson, for her part, humorously admitted that the two of them sometimes had to consciously rein in their enjoyment of each other's company, joking that if they had allowed themselves to have too much fun together, the actual filming schedule might never have been completed on time. This genuine camaraderie between the two lead actresses became something of a recurring theme throughout the film's press tour, with both women openly gushing about how much they enjoyed working opposite one another, even as their characters were locked in an increasingly vicious battle of wits and fashion on screen. One particularly amusing recurring bit that both actresses discussed involved a small but memorable piece of physical comedy tied to the Baroness's character, specifically a moment in which she dramatically tosses a cloth napkin and an actual fork out of a window in a display of icy, aristocratic disdain. According to Stone, this small gesture became one of her favorite moments to watch unfold during filming, and she admitted that no matter how many times they shot the scene, watching Thompson casually fling the utensil out the window without so much as a change in her stoic expression consistently made her laugh on set. Thompson herself later explained the thinking behind the choice, describing how the Baroness represented a rare opportunity for her to finally play what she jokingly called a proper villain after spending so many years portraying what her own mother used to affectionately describe as good women in frocks. This shift into full villainy clearly delighted Thompson, who has spoken enthusiastically about how much fun she had leaning into the character's monstrous, appetite-suppressing coldness, joking in interviews that she personally doesn't trust people who don't eat, a comment that captures the sly, self-aware humor she brought to interviews about the role. The film's elaborate costumes, while visually spectacular, also created plenty of genuinely funny and physically demanding challenges for both actresses during filming, and several of these stories have become fan-favorite anecdotes from the production. Thompson has spoken candidly and hilariously about the sheer physical difficulty involved in simply putting on and removing some of the Baroness's most extravagant gowns, joking that certain outfits practically wore her rather than the other way around. She has described elaborate costume changes that required multiple crew members physically hauling on ropes and pulleys just to properly secure certain dresses, and she has openly joked about how something as simple as using the bathroom became a surprisingly involved team effort whenever she was dressed in the Baroness's most restrictive gowns. A comment that never fails to draw laughs from interviewers given how matter-of-factly she delivers it. Stone has shared similarly amusing stories about her own costuming challenges, particularly regarding one of her favorite and most memorably absurd looks, a dramatic gown she wore while dramatically emerging from atop a moving garbage truck, complete with an enormous 40-foot train trailing behind her. Stone explained that the massive train was actually not permanently attached to the dress at all, since doing so would have made it physically impossible for her to move into position for the shot, and instead the crew attached the sweeping train onto the costume at the very last possible moment right before filming the sequence, a logistical challenge that required careful timing and coordination to pull off successfully. She also fondly recalled another elaborate sequence involving an enormous, sweeping skirt used to dramatically cover an entire parked car in one fluid motion, describing the physical challenge of climbing onto the vehicle and executing the dramatic skirt movement as both incredibly difficult and enormously satisfying once they finally captured the shot correctly. Because the two lead actresses were dressed in such elaborate, transformative costumes throughout the shoot, they often spent significant portions of their days working separately in their own individual hair, makeup, and costume trailers before finally coming together on set once fully dressed in character. Both women have described the experience of seeing each other for the first time each day in full costume as something akin to viewing a walking piece of art, admitting that they would often find themselves circling one another with genuine fascination and admiration before getting down to the business of actually filming their scenes together. This mutual appreciation for the incredible craftsmanship surrounding them added another layer of warmth to their on-set relationship, turning what could have been an exhausting, purely technical costuming process into something both women clearly found genuinely delightful and inspiring throughout the production. The film's animal performers also contributed their fair share of memorable, if less publicly discussed, on-set moments, particularly given the significant number of scenes involving trained dogs throughout the story. Behind-the-scenes production notes revealed just how much careful choreography and training went into achieving even seemingly simple canine actions on screen. For instance, in order to get a dog to convincingly run up a set of stairs onto a fashion show catwalk, trainers relied on a continuous buzzer cue positioned at the base of the staircase to guide the animal's movement precisely on cue, a technique that required extensive rehearsal to perfect. In another memorable sequence involving a dog swimming in a fountain, the animal was actually fitted with a specially designed wetsuit beneath its visible fur to keep it warm and comfortable, and between takes the dog was kept cozy in a heated tent along with a protective coat, reflecting the level of care and logistical planning that went into even the film's smaller, more whimsical animal-driven moments. Scenes involving multiple identical Dalmatians required careful positioning and cueing from trainers standing just out of frame, using hand signals and verbal commands to direct the dog's attention and movement in perfect synchronization, a genuinely impressive feat of animal choreography that audiences likely never think twice about while watching the finished film. Taken together, the countless behind-the-scenes stories from Cruella paint a picture of a production defined by genuine creative passion, playful camaraderie between its two powerhouse leads, and an enormous amount of technical craftsmanship poured into every costume, set, and carefully trained animal performance. From the years-long journey the project took before finally landing with the right director and cast, to the joyful, tequila-fueled friendship that blossomed between Emma Stone and Emma Thompson despite their characters' bitter on-screen rivalry, the making of Cruella reflects the kind of dedicated, detail-obsessed filmmaking that helped transform a familiar animated villain into one of the more surprisingly rich and stylish origin stories in recent Disney history. Cruella is deeply rooted in real cultural and historical movements, and understanding those roots adds a tremendous amount of depth to what might otherwise be dismissed as simply another glossy studio origin story. The film is set against the backdrop of London during the late 1960s and into the 1970s, a period that represented one of the most transformative eras in modern fashion and youth culture history. This was the moment when the flower power optimism and free-spirited idealism of the 1960s hippie movement began to curdle into something angrier, more confrontational, and far more visually aggressive, giving rise to the punk rock movement that would come to define an entire generation of British youth culture. The filmmakers behind Cruella were clearly intentional about placing their story directly within this cultural moment, using the raw, rebellious energy of early punk as both a visual language and a thematic backbone for Estella's transformation into the character audiences already know as one of Disney's most iconic villains. At the very center of this historical inspiration sits the real-life partnership between fashion designer Vivienne Westwood and her then-partner Malcolm McLaren, two figures who are widely credited as being among the primary architects of punk fashion as it exploded onto the streets of London during the 1970s. Westwood, born in 1941 in a small village in Derbyshire, trained originally as a primary school teacher before her life took a dramatic turn after meeting McLaren, who would later go on to manage the seminal punk band the Sex Pistols. Together, Westwood and McLaren opened a boutique on London's King's Road in Chelsea, a shop that evolved through several controversial and provocative names and identities throughout the decade, eventually becoming widely recognized as one of the true epicenters of the emerging punk aesthetic. Their designs deliberately rejected the softness and idealism of hippie fashion, instead embracing torn fabrics, safety pins, bondage-inspired silhouettes, tartan patterns, and deliberately confrontational imagery designed to shock mainstream society and challenge conventional ideas about beauty, femininity, and propriety. This same spirit of confrontation and rebellion runs directly through Cruella's evolving wardrobe throughout the film, as her designs grow increasingly bold, torn, and theatrical in direct opposition to the rigid, controlled elegance represented by the Baroness. costume designer Jenny Bevan has spoken about how deliberately she wove references to Westwood's punk aesthetic into Cruella's look, using military-inspired jackets, dramatically oversized skirts, and deliberately unconventional silhouettes that echo the kind of boundary-pushing designs Westwood and McLaren were creating in real London boutiques during this exact historical period. However, Westwood and McLaren were far from the only real historical and cultural figures who influenced the film's visual language. Bevan has openly discussed drawing inspiration from a wide range of iconic style figures spanning several different decades and movements. The theatrical, ever-shifting personal style of David Bowie, an artist who spent much of the 1970s constantly reinventing his own image through bold, androgynous, and boundary-defying fashion choices, clearly informed some of the more dramatic and gender-fluid elements found throughout Cruella's escalating series of public fashion statements. The influence of British designer Alexander McQueen, whose headline-grabbing runway shows decades later would become legendary for their theatrical, almost performance art quality, can also be felt in the way Cruella's grand entrances are staged as spectacle rather than simple clothing reveals. Bevan additionally pulled inspiration from the surrealist fashion pioneer Elsa Schiaparelli, an Italian designer active decades earlier in the 1930s who famously incorporated bold prints, including newspaper-inspired patterns, into her groundbreaking couture designs, a visual reference that surfaces in some of the more graphic, text-heavy elements of Cruella's costuming. Even German new wave singer Nina Hagen, known for her wild, theatrical makeup and confrontational stage persona, left her fingerprints on the film's overall aesthetic sensibility, particularly in the more exaggerated makeup and styling choices seen throughout Cruella's public appearances. This layering of real historical fashion icons across multiple decades gives the film's visual world a richness that goes well beyond simple 1970s pastiche, instead creating a kind of fashion history collage that rewards viewers familiar with the real designers and cultural figures being referenced. Beyond fashion, the film's punk rock setting connects to a much broader and genuinely turbulent period in British social and political history. The early to mid-1970s in the United Kingdom were marked by significant economic hardship, labor unrest, rising unemployment, and a pervasive sense of disillusionment among British youth, particularly working-class young people who felt increasingly alienated from the establishment and traditional institutions of power. This social and economic backdrop is widely understood by historians and cultural critics as a major contributing factor to punk's explosive rise, as the movement's aggressive, anti-establishment energy gave voice to genuine frustration and anger felt by an entire generation who saw few opportunities for themselves within the existing social order. Although Cruella softens and stylizes this historical context considerably for the sake of family-friendly entertainment, the film's core narrative, following an orphaned, working-class young woman who feels perpetually shut out of the wealthy, elitist fashion establishment until she decides to tear that establishment down through spectacle and rebellion, clearly echoes this broader historical tension between the disenfranchised youth of the era and the entrenched aristocratic institutions they increasingly viewed with contempt. In this sense, the rivalry between Cruella and the Baroness can be read as a kind of stylized, theatrical dramatization of the larger generational and class-based conflict that defined much of British youth culture throughout this genuinely turbulent decade. The character of Cruella de Vil herself carries a rich literary history that stretches back decades before this particular film was ever conceived. She first appeared in author Dodie Smith's 1956 novel, originally published under the title The 101 Dalmatians, though it was initially serialized under the title The Great Dog Robbery before being released in its final novel form. Dodie Smith, born Dorothy Gladys Smith in 1896 in Lancashire, England, was already an accomplished and successful playwright by the time she wrote her beloved dog-centered adventure story, and the novel's central canine character Pongo was reportedly named after Smith's own real-life pet Dalmatian, adding a charming personal touch to the story's origins. The novel follows a married pair of Dalmatians, Pongo and Mrs., as they undertake a daring rescue mission to save their litter of puppies after the dogs are dog-napped by the story's memorably villainous antagonist, Cruella de Vil, a wealthy, fur-obsessed neighbor whose sinister lair, known as Hell Hall, serves as the dark, gothic counterpoint to the warm domestic world of the story's canine heroes. Walt Disney personally reached out to Smith to secure the rights to adapt her novel, and the two reportedly developed a genuinely warm pen-pal correspondence throughout the adaptation process, even though Smith later expressed some mild disappointment over the size of her credit when the finished animated film was released. That original animated adaptation, released in 1961 under the title 101 Dalmatians, became an immediate commercial success and remains fondly remembered as one of Disney's classic mid-century animated features, even though contemporary critics at the time noted that it didn't quite reach the emotional or artistic heights of some of the studio's most celebrated earlier work. The character and story proved durable enough to inspire a live-action remake in 1996, simply titled 101 Dalmatians, followed by a sequel called 102 Dalmatians in 2000, both of which reimagined the villainous Cruella through the lens of actress Glenn Close's memorably theatrical performance. Cruella, released in 2021, represents the franchise's boldest reinvention yet, choosing to abandon the familiar dog-napping plot entirely in favor of an origin story that attempts to explain, rather than simply dramatize, the psychological and emotional forces that shaped this iconic villain long before she ever became obsessed with Dalmatian fur coats. This approach places Cruella firmly within a broader and increasingly popular cultural trend that has swept through Hollywood filmmaking over the past decade or so, one in which traditionally one-dimensional villains are given rich, sympathetic origin stories designed to humanize and psychologically explain their eventual descent into villainy. Critics and cultural commentators have frequently drawn comparisons between Cruella and other high-profile examples of this trend, most notably the 2019 film Joker, which similarly reimagined a classic comic book villain through the lens of psychological trauma, social alienation, and class resentment, ultimately earning both significant critical acclaim and a considerable amount of cultural debate regarding the ethics and implications of humanizing dangerous, destructive characters. Disney itself had already begun experimenting with this same storytelling approach through its 2014 film Maleficent, which similarly reimagined the villainous fairy from Sleeping Beauty as a wronged, sympathetic figure whose villainy stemmed directly from betrayal and heartbreak rather than innate evil. Film critics reviewing Cruella upon its release frequently placed it within the same lineage of what has sometimes been called the give the devil his due storytelling mode, a narrative approach that has also appeared in television dramas exploring the backstories of figures like Norman Bates and Nurse Ratched, as well as in various reimaginings of classic horror villains. What distinguishes Cruella within this broader trend, according to many critics, is the way the film ultimately refuses to fully excuse or sanitize its central character, choosing instead to show audiences exactly how and why she will eventually become the puppy-obsessed, morally compromised villain already familiar from decades of Disney storytelling, without erasing or softening that eventual destination. This careful balancing act, providing emotional context and sympathy for Cruella's transformation while still honoring her established villainous future, was widely praised by critics as one of the film's smartest and most surprisingly mature narrative choices. The film's critical reception upon release in May of 2021 was notably positive, particularly given the historically mixed critical track record of Disney's broader live-action remake and reimagining initiative throughout the preceding several years. Many reviewers specifically praised Cruella for feeling genuinely distinct from other entries in that same live-action remake category, with several critics noting that the film barely felt like a Disney production at all given its unusually dark tone, morally complex central character, and unapologetically stylish, almost theatrical visual sensibility. Prominent critics drew comparisons between Cruella and beloved ensemble heist and fashion world films such as Ocean's 11 and The Devil Wears Prada, praising director Craig Gillespie for successfully blending genuine style with genuine substance in a way that elevated the film well beyond typical franchise filmmaking expectations. Audience reception was similarly strong, with polling data from opening weekend showing an overwhelmingly positive average grade from moviegoers and a large majority of surveyed audience members indicating they would recommend the film to others. This combination of strong critical and audience reception helped cement Cruella's reputation as one of the more surprising and successful entries within Disney's ongoing live-action reimagining strategy. The film's achievements were further validated through significant industry recognition during awards season, most notably through its nomination and eventual victory in the Best Achievement in Costume Design category at the 94th Academy Awards, a well-deserved honor that recognized designer Jenny Bevan's extraordinary work translating decades of real fashion history into a cohesive, character-driven cinematic wardrobe. The film also received a nomination in the Best Makeup and Hairstyling category at that same ceremony, further acknowledging the tremendous below-the-line craftsmanship that went into bringing the film's richly detailed visual world to life. Beyond the Academy Awards, Emma Stone received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Comedy or Musical for her performance, recognizing the difficult tonal balancing act required to portray both the vulnerable, sympathetic Estella and the increasingly theatrical, unpredictable Cruella within a single unified performance. Altogether, the film accumulated dozens of award nominations and wins across various ceremonies throughout its awards season run, reflecting the broad industry recognition of its technical and performance achievements even beyond its strong commercial and critical reception. The film's soundtrack similarly reflects a deep engagement with real musical and cultural history from the era it depicts, featuring an extensive lineup of classic rock, glam rock, and early punk-adjacent songs that would have been genuinely playing on London radio stations and in London clubs throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s. This carefully curated soundtrack functions almost as a character in its own right throughout the film, using period-accurate musical selections to reinforce the film's cultural setting and to underscore key emotional and narrative beats throughout Cruella's transformation. The decision to close the film with an original song titled Call Me Cruella, performed by the acclaimed British musician Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine, represented a deliberate bridge between the film's historical 1970s setting and contemporary musical sensibilities, giving audiences a modern artistic interpretation of the character's raucous, rebellious energy as the credits rolled. This blending of authentic period music with a contemporary original composition reflects the film's broader creative strategy of using real cultural and historical touchstones as a foundation, while still ultimately crafting something that felt fresh and relevant to contemporary audiences in 2021. It's also worth noting how Cruella engages with broader cultural conversations around fashion's relationship to power, class, and rebellion, themes that extend well beyond the specific historical moment of 1970s London punk culture. Throughout the film, clothing and personal style function as tools of both oppression and liberation, with the rigid, tightly controlled fashion world represented by the Baroness serving as a stand-in for entrenched, exclusionary systems of power that determine who gets to be seen, celebrated, and taken seriously within society. Cruella's increasingly bold, boundary-pushing fashion statements throughout the film function as direct acts of rebellion against these systems, using spectacle and audacity as weapons against an establishment that has spent her entire life dismissing and overlooking her based on her class background and lack of formal connections. This thematic through-line connects the film to much broader real-world cultural conversations about fashion's historical role in social movements, from the way punk fashion in real 1970s London functioned as a genuine expression of working-class rebellion against economic hardship and social exclusion, to the way marginalized communities throughout history have repeatedly used bold, unconventional personal style as a means of claiming visibility and asserting identity in the face of systems designed to render them invisible. Cruella's release also arrived at a particularly unusual and historically significant moment for the film industry as a whole, given that it debuted during the ongoing disruptions caused by the global COVID-19 pandemic. The film's premiere in Los Angeles on May 18, 2021, was widely noted at the time as one of the first major red carpet events held since the pandemic had brought the entertainment industry's usual promotional and premiere activities to a near total standstill more than a year earlier. This context adds an additional layer of cultural significance to the film's release, as Cruella became part of a broader wave of major studio productions attempting to navigate the deeply uncertain and rapidly changing theatrical landscape of that particular moment in film history. Ultimately opting for a hybrid release strategy that offered the film simultaneously in traditional theaters and through Disney's streaming platform, reflecting the broader industry-wide experimentation with distribution models that defined this unusual and historically unprecedented period for the movie business. Taken together, all of these layered cultural and historical threads, the real history of punk fashion and its key architects, the deeper social and economic context of 1970s Britain, the decades-long literary and cinematic history of the Cruella de Vil character, the film's place within a broader contemporary trend of sympathetic villain origin storytelling, and its unusual release amid a historically significant moment for the entertainment industry, combined to give Cruella a surprising amount of cultural depth and historical texture for what might otherwise be dismissed as simply another glossy studio franchise entry. The film's creative team clearly understood that grounding their theatrical, larger-than-life story within genuine historical and cultural touchstones would give audiences something richer and more resonant to connect with, transforming a familiar Disney villain's origin story into a genuine celebration of punk rebellion, fashion history, and the enduring cultural power of using personal style as a form of self-expression and defiance against a world that so often tries to dictate who gets to be seen and celebrated. Perhaps the richest irony surrounding Cruella begins with the real historical figure whose spirit the film borrows most heavily, Vivienne Westwood, the so-called Queen of Punk whose entire career embodies one of fashion history's most striking contradictions. Westwood built her name in the 1970s by designing deliberately confrontational, anti-establishment clothing meant to shock polite society and reject conventional notions of beauty and order, working out of a small boutique on King's Road that became a gathering place for the Sex Pistols and the broader punk movement she helped ignite. Yet decades later, that same rebellious designer was formally honored by the very establishment she once seemed determined to destroy, receiving an OB in 1992 and later being made a dame by the British monarchy in 2006, meaning the woman whose early work was built around bondage straps, safety pins, and deliberately torn fabric eventually curtsied before the Queen to accept a royal title. Westwood herself openly acknowledged this contradiction in later interviews, admitting that the punk movement she helped create had essentially become a marketing opportunity, and she leaned into this irony rather than denying it, arguing that using fashion's own systems of wealth and visibility was itself a form of rebellion. This is a strikingly appropriate irony to sit underneath Cruella, a film in which a scrappy, anti-establishment outsider builds her entire identity around tearing down a wealthy fashion empire, only to end the story by inheriting that very empire and becoming the powerful, wealthy head of a fashion house herself, essentially transforming from punk outsider into the aristocratic insider she once despised. Echoing Westwood's own real journey from anti-establishment provocateur to knighted fashion royalty almost exactly. This layer of irony deepens considerably when you consider that Cruella, a film explicitly built around themes of individuality, rebellion, and refusing to conform to a rigid, controlling establishment, was produced by Walt Disney Pictures, quite possibly the single largest and most powerful corporate entertainment conglomerate on the planet. A story all about a scrappy young woman rejecting the rules imposed on her by wealthy elites was greenlit, financed, and distributed by a multi-billion-dollar global media empire, marketed with an enormous corporate budget, and released simultaneously in theaters and through a premium paid streaming tier designed specifically to extract additional revenue from eager audiences. The film's punk aesthetic, once a genuine expression of working-class British youth rejecting mainstream consumer culture, was repackaged into elaborate, expensive costumes designed by an Academy Award-winning designer and worn by two Oscar-winning actresses at a star-studded Hollywood premiere. Transforming a movement that originally stood in direct opposition to corporate consumerism into one of that very same corporate consumerism's most celebrated products. It is a genuinely ironic full-circle moment. Punk rock's raw rejection of polished, mainstream commercial culture became, decades later, the polished, mainstream commercial product of one of history's most successful entertainment corporations. Another layer of historical irony involves the treatment of Dalmatians themselves throughout the story. The entire tragic engine of Estella's origin story is set into motion by Dalmatians, since it is the Baroness's dogs whose aggressive pursuit indirectly causes Catherine's fatal fall from the cliffside early in the film, an event that leaves young Estella orphaned and sets her on the path toward becoming Cruella in the first place. And yet, by the film's closing moments, this same character, whose entire personal tragedy was caused by Dalmatians, is shown affectionately gifting a Dalmatian puppy to a young couple named Anita and Roger, a warm, tender gesture that directly plants the seed for what audiences already know will eventually become an entirely different and far more sinister relationship with that very same breed of dog. The film essentially shows us a woman who loves dogs, including Dalmatians specifically, tenderly gifting one as a token of friendship, fully aware that this same woman is destined to become the puppy-napping, obsessed villain of a completely different story, creating a quietly unsettling irony that rewards longtime fans of the original animated classic who understand exactly where this seemingly sweet gesture is ultimately headed. There is also a rich irony buried within the film's central family relationship reveal. Throughout the story, Estella believes her entire identity and sense of self was shaped by her loving adoptive mother Catherine, a woman who dedicated her life to protecting Estella and suppressing the wilder, more dangerous side of her personality that she nicknamed Cruella. Yet the film ultimately reveals that the true architect of Estella's suffering, the Baroness, is in fact her actual biological mother, a woman who ordered her own infant daughter to be taken away and effectively erased from existence the moment she was born, viewing her own child as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to her ambitions. In an almost unbearably ironic twist, the very qualities the Baroness spent her life projecting outward, her ruthless ambition, her icy self-interest, and her willingness to discard anything standing between her and success, are ultimately revealed to be genetic inheritances passed directly down to the daughter she tried to eliminate. Meaning the Baroness essentially created the very monster who would ultimately destroy her, biologically engineering her own downfall through the daughter she once tried to erase. The casting and career histories of the film's two lead actresses add another layer of interesting irony to the production. Emma Stone, who plays a character whose defining professional breakthrough comes from cleverly, audaciously redesigning a department store's official display window without any authorization whatsoever, essentially building her entire career on a spontaneous act of unsanctioned creative rebellion, had years earlier built real-world stardom playing characters who similarly subverted authority and social expectation. Most notably in her breakout film Easy A, in which she played a high school student who cleverly manipulates her own reputation and public image to expose the hypocrisy of the social systems around her. There's a pleasing symmetry in an actress so associated with smart, subversive performances about reputation and self-invention eventually landing a role about a woman literally reinventing her public identity from scratch through audacious, unauthorized acts of self-expression. Emma Thompson's involvement carries its own quietly ironic historical texture, as well. Thompson has spoken candidly in interviews about how much she relished finally getting to play what she jokingly called a proper villain in Cruella, noting that she had spent so much of her decades-long career portraying what her own mother had affectionately described as good women in frocks, largely warm, sympathetic, morally upright characters across a filmography stacked with beloved literary adaptations and family-friendly fare, including her own Academy Award-winning screenplay adaptation of Jane Austen's deeply moral, socially conscious novel sense and sensibility. There is something wonderfully ironic about one of British cinema's most trusted, moral, matronly performers, an actress once literally trusted enough to write and star in her own adaptation of a Jane Austen novel about propriety and social responsibility, finally getting to fully unleash a character defined by cold-blooded selfishness and moral bankruptcy. Joking in interviews that she personally distrusts people who don't eat, a delightfully wicked line from an actress whose entire prior public image was built around warmth and moral seriousness. The film's historical setting within the 1970s punk movement also carries an additional layer of irony when you consider how thoroughly that movement's radical political ambitions ultimately failed on their own terms. Punk rock emerged during a period of genuine economic hardship and social unrest in Britain, fueled by a generation of disaffected working-class youth who used aggressive, anti-establishment fashion and music as a form of political protest against the entrenched power structures they held responsible for their economic and social alienation. Yet historians and cultural critics have widely noted that punk's anti-establishment political ambitions were largely unsuccessful, failing to meaningfully abate the rise of the deeply conservative political era that followed throughout the 1980s in both Britain and the United States. What did succeed, however, was punk's visual and aesthetic legacy, which proved durable enough decades later to be lovingly recreated by a major Hollywood studio, celebrated at the Academy Awards, and packaged into a globally distributed piece of family entertainment. In other words, the movement failed almost entirely as a political revolution but succeeded spectacularly as a fashion brand, an irony that Vivienne Westwood herself openly acknowledged and that Cruella unintentionally reinforces simply by existing as a lavishly funded corporate celebration of a movement originally built around rejecting exactly that kind of corporate lavishness. Finally, there's a certain irony in how the film's own awards season success mirrors its central thematic tension. Cruella went on to win the Academy Award for Best Costume Design, meaning a film about an outsider using audacious, rule-breaking fashion to subvert and humiliate a rigid, elite institution was itself formally honored by one of the entertainment industry's most rigid, elite institutions, the very same Academy that has long been associated with tradition, exclusivity, and carefully guarded prestige. The scrappy punk rebel of the story, in a sense, walked away with validation from the establishment in exactly the same way her real-world designer inspiration Vivienne Westwood once did, closing the loop on a film whose behind-the-scenes history turns out to be just as layered with contradiction and irony as the fictional story unfolding on screen. One of the most striking ironies at the heart of Cruella lies in the fact that Estella spends her entire childhood being taught to suppress and hide the very side of herself that will eventually save her life and secure her future. Catherine spends years dyeing her daughter's hair, urging her to keep her head down, and begging her to bury the wild, defiant impulses she nicknames Cruella, all in an attempt to protect Estella from a world that punishes anyone who stands out. Yet it is precisely that suppressed, rebellious side of her personality, once fully unleashed, that allows Estella to survive, thrive, and ultimately defeat the very forces that orphaned her in the first place. The identity her mother spent a lifetime trying to hide turns out to be the exact identity Estella needed all along, meaning every well-intentioned effort to protect her by making her smaller and less visible was, in hindsight, actively working against her own eventual salvation. There is a similarly rich irony embedded in the necklace that drives so much of the plot. Catherine repeatedly warns young Estella that the necklace must never be worn and must be protected above all else, without ever explaining why, leaving Estella to carry this cryptic instruction for years without understanding its true significance. When Estella finally does wear it, at a gala meant to celebrate her own growing success within the Baroness's fashion house, the necklace becomes the very object that unravels the mystery of her entire life, revealing her true parentage and ultimately arming her with the leverage she needs to take down the woman who wronged her. The single object her mother most wanted hidden becomes the single object most responsible for finally exposing the truth, meaning the years of secrecy surrounding that necklace ultimately served to delay, rather than prevent, the revelation Catherine had spent her life trying to avoid. Perhaps the most devastating irony of the entire story is the fact that Estella spends years working directly for, admiring, and eventually being personally mentored by the same woman responsible for orphaning her as a child, without either of them realizing the connection until deep into their relationship. The Baroness takes Estella under her wing specifically because she recognizes raw talent, effectively training and elevating the daughter she once tried to have killed as an infant, unknowingly grooming her own replacement, and eventual downfall with her own hands. Every lesson the Baroness teaches Estella about confidence, ruthlessness, and commanding a room becomes a tool Estella later turns directly against her, meaning the Baroness essentially built and sharpened the very weapon that would ultimately destroy her empire, simply by being generous enough, or perhaps arrogant enough, to mentor a talented young woman she had no idea was her own flesh and blood. The dynamic between Cruella and the Baroness is layered with irony as well, since the entire point of Cruella's elaborate public campaign is to expose the Baroness as a fraud and a monster, and yet in the process of doing so, Estella becomes increasingly willing to lie, manipulate, and deceive the very people who love her most, including Jasper and Horace, the two loyal friends who raised her like family after her mother's death. In trying to punish the Baroness for her coldness and self-interest, Estella begins exhibiting flashes of that exact same coldness and self-interest toward the people closest to her, growing so consumed by her transformation into Cruella that her friends begin to genuinely worry she is turning into precisely the kind of person she claims to despise. The story repeatedly suggests that Estella risks becoming a version of the Baroness in her pursuit of destroying her, a chilling irony given what audiences already know about the version of Cruella de Vil this story is ultimately building toward. There is also a quiet irony in how the Baroness's own personal history mirrors the very cruelty she later inflicts on her daughter. The Baroness, a woman who built her entire identity and empire around image, perfection, and control, ordered her own infant daughter's disappearance specifically because a child would have complicated her carefully curated public image and ambitious career, prioritizing appearance and status over her own flesh and blood. Years later, this same obsession with image and status is precisely what allows Cruella to defeat her, since Cruella's entire strategy revolves around publicly humiliating the Baroness in front of the same elite social circles whose approval she has spent her life protecting. The Baroness is ultimately destroyed by the exact same forces she once used to justify discarding her own daughter, her desperate need to control how she is perceived by the wealthy, image-obsessed world she has spent her life courting. The fake death sequence near the film's climax carries its own layer of irony, since Estella orchestrates an elaborate deception in which a mannequin dressed as Cruella is thrown from the very same cliffside terrace where her mother actually died years earlier, essentially staging a fictional death in the exact location of a real one. The Baroness, who was indirectly responsible for one death at that cliffside through her dog's aggressive behavior years earlier, believes she has now directly orchestrated a second death at that same location, only to discover that this supposed victory is itself an elaborate fiction, meaning the location tied to her earlier crime becomes the site of her ultimate undoing. A callback that transforms a site of genuine tragedy into a stage for poetic justice. Even the film's central visual language carries a layer of ironic tension, since Cruella spends the entire story positioned as the wild, chaotic outsider disrupting the polished, controlled aesthetic world of the Baroness, and yet by the film's conclusion, Cruella herself becomes the head of a major fashion house, inheriting exactly the kind of power, wealth, and cultural authority the Baroness once held. The rebel who spent the entire film attacking the establishment from the outside ends the story firmly seated at the very top of that same establishment, meaning the ultimate victory over the Baroness isn't simply revenge but a complete inheritance of everything the Baroness once represented, repurposed and reshaped in Cruella's own rebellious image rather than dismantled entirely. Finally, there's a lingering irony in the film's very structure as an origin story, since audiences watching Cruella already know, going in, that this sympathetic, wronged young woman is destined to become the puppy-napping, morally compromised villain of an entirely different and much darker story. Every act of justified revenge, every moment of triumphant self-expression, and every scene designed to make audiences root for Estella's transformation into Cruella is undercut by the audience's prior knowledge of where this character's story eventually leads, creating a persistent dramatic irony that runs beneath the entire film. One in which viewers are simultaneously cheering for a woman's empowerment, while quietly aware that this same empowerment is the first chapter of her eventual descent into villainy. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the layers of irony woven throughout Cruella's story, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with fellow film lovers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next detailed breakdown of the films you love.